So it's probably past due for me making an updated version of my rest of season rankings for 2022 fantasy football, but here we are in today's episode. I'll be breaking down from week 10 moving forward my top 30 running backs here for the rest of this 2022 NFL year. Now in this episode, we're now into double-digit week territory, so we are getting to the back half stretch of the season, and that means I'll be breaking down some playoff schedules here, talking about strength of schedule going forward. We have a pretty good idea of who these players are, what they bring to the table each week. Now it's time to start going a step further even and evaluating how these players that we've been watching all year long here are going to be playing out the rest of the way down the stretch here. So as always, if you're new around here, drop down, click that subscribe button, turn the bell on as well so you're notified whenever I post a new piece of content here. We're doing this every single day here on the SFS channel, and I want to help out as many of you as I possibly can this season. Additionally, these player rankings are also going to be featured in the receiver portion as well, which is being posted today. So if you're watching the running back segment in this episode, the receivers are live and available for you to check out after you're done watching today's episode. So all the more reason to subscribe and stick around here for a future episode, but let's dive in. All right, I'm going to be very brief with the first 5 running backs here. The only reason I'm really covering these guys is to briefly touch on their strength of schedule the rest of the way this season. So CMC, the only change made to this tier since the last episode is he went from my RB2 to my RB1 here. If you're looking for numeric rankings, follow today's episode left to right. So this is my running backs 1 through 5 for the rest of this season in this number 1 tier here. So CMC gets the jump for me post trade to the 49ers. He is the best fantasy football skill set. He is on a very good team here. The game script should be good. The utility for him, the way they use him in this offense is fantastic. He has an average strength of schedule going forward, so not necessarily a positive or negative in terms of the implications that has for him. Saquon Barkley, we know what he is. He's probably been the best fantasy football player and running back until this point in the season. He does have a more difficult than average schedule, I should say. His schedule is above average difficulty, a better way of phrasing that here. From this point going forward, especially for that playoff time now, the only reason this concerns me is it's still the Giants. I know the Giants have a very good record right now. They have proven themselves to this point in the season. We will see how this continues here down the second half of this year, and if they can keep up these positive game scripts and being able to continually feed Barkley. If that's the case, I don't have no issues with him here. Austin Eckler, another player. He's been phenomenal since he ended that touchdown dry spell weeks 1 through 3. Scoring left and right, having the utility and usage we look for a dynamic player every single week. He's another guy that does have an above average difficulty for his strength of schedule going forward here. But again, for these blue chip players, it's a little bit less of a concern than it will be with some of the guys down a couple of tiers below. Derrick Henry, he actually has a very favorable playoff and strength of schedule moving forward the rest of the year. A very good sign and indicator for a player of his caliber just as a talent and what his role is in this offense on a week-to-week basis as it is on a normal week here. A fun fact and stat I saw while kind of surfing through Twitter here over the last couple of days, Derrick Henry has accounted for 100% of the Tennessee Titans offensive touchdowns since week 7. That is crazy. I mean, it's only been a 3-week span since then, week 7, 8, and 9. Still very impressive stuff there. And then Nick Chubb, I went back and forth evaluating if I wanted to knock him down into tier 2 here. He ultimately stays for me. He's coming off of a bye week in week 9, so I wanted to give him the benefit of the doubt. He's been phenomenal, consistent. He's averaging 5.3 yards per carry this season. We know what he represents here. The only real question with Nick Chubb is how will Deshaun Watson's reinsertion or insertion for the first time into this Browns offense impact his fantasy status and value here down the stretch of the season. Other than that, though, we've seen what he represents this year, and he has really, impressed me and, full circle basis here in terms of checking the boxes, efficiency, explosiveness. The offensive line play has created touchdown opportunities. It's been a great season for Chubb here. I think he still deserves to be in this tier, despite the fact that he might not be the flashiest, best receiving threat, if you will, in terms of how we evaluated him in the preseason. All right, into my second tier here for the running back position, my RB6 through 8 going forward. I've got Travis Etienne in this tier. He has a really good strength of schedule going forward, as well as in the fantasy playoffs. That is a huge boost for a player that has broken out here in the last few weeks and really asserted himself into the PPR PPR RB1 conversation. He's been doing exceptional things on a weekly basis because of his explosiveness. Overall, the offense has found really good ways to use him here, and I could not be more excited for what he could present down the stretch. If you bought low on Travis Etienne during the tough times, this is a league-winning pickup potentially, a guy that could even crack into the top 5 as we look down the stretch of this season. Another guy in that conversation is Kenneth Walker. Now, he has an average strength of schedule, not something that gets me excited, but not something that really scares me off of him here. He's another player, flat-out certified league winner. The things he's doing from a workhorse running back perspective on this productive Seattle offense is exceptional. He's getting you points every week. He's got a touchdown streak. I believe it's up to 5 games now going for him. Every box is being checked here for Ken Walker, and the game script concerns I had about him in the preseason are not even a factor here, or at least have not reared their head to this point in the season as we talk here in week 10. And then Alvin Kamara, another player with a phenomenal strength of schedule the rest of the way. This is one of the indicators for me of reasons to potentially have bought him about a month or so back when he still hadn't really found his footing yet, and it looked like his, status for the season was up in the air in terms of his lineup utility. He looks great now. Now, he did come off of a poor week 9 performance. They did struggle against Baltimore on Monday Night Football, but with the strength of schedule moving forward, the fact that I think this offense will bounce back here, they're starting to get a little bit more healthy. They're getting guys like offensive lineman Trevor Penning back into the mix here. Jarvis is healthy. This has been a very undermanned group as of late. I think that the more synergy this team has together, and obviously the more talent on the field, the more beneficial it'll be for everyone. So for AK, we know who he is now. He's a seasoned veteran. We've seen him play football since 2017, so it is this year 6. It's just going to be, at the end of the day, execution for him in delivering those numbers that we expect from him here going forward. Next up here in my tier 3 running backs are just 2 names, my running backs 9 and 10 for the rest of the season. Now, I think a lot of you, and rightfully so, are probably wondering why these 2 do not make the tier above this marker, but I think, to be honest right now, in my true evaluation of Joe Mixon, there's going to be a hefty amount of recency bias coming off of the 8th most scoring points ever in a fantasy football matchup in week 9 against the Carolina Panthers. That's going to elevate his rest of season evaluation for a lot of players going forward. Now, I love Joe Mixon. I'd been yelling to buy low on Joe for weeks ahead of this week's matchup or this past week's matchup where he went completely berserk. The Bengals are on bye this week, so we're not going to see him here. That might cool things off a little bit, but I just, looking at the sample size and the body of work we have for that, leading up to that point in the season, up until week 9 last week, his efficiency has been poor this year. This offensive line has struggled to move the football. Now, Cincinnati is getting a little bit healthier. That could help things, and I'd be, ecstatic to see him move up into this number 2 tier. I think that there is a world where he fits right alongside Alvin Kamara as my RB 9 for the rest of the season. Maybe he even hops Alvin Kamara and moves his way up the board. But just knowing what we've seen from Cincinnati at this point in the year, the inefficiencies and struggles they've had offensively, I'm not expecting those games to occur again for Joe Mixon. Of course, you can't expect that for anyone because that was literally a top 10 all-time fantasy performance that he had in week 9. So I'm trying to stay reasonably balanced with my evaluation here. I don't want to be the guy that overreacts. Now, again, there is the argument that I'm underreacting here, but I'm trying to stay somewhat neutral. It's a really big positive thing that happened for him. I'm super excited. I had him in a couple leagues where he went just berserking, again, crazy for me, but just trying to stay kind of mellow-headed here and have an even-keeled evaluation. And then Josh Jacobs, I should mention, for Joe Mixon, he does have a difficult strength of schedule moving forward into the fantasy football playoffs. So for Josh Jacobs, the reason that his evaluation comes in here as my running back 10, despite the fact that he had a 3-week stretch of scoring 27 points or more in fantasy for half PPR scoring, he has a terrible strength of schedule, not only for the rest of the season, but the fantasy playoffs as well. He does not have one above average matchup in the 4-week stretch that you could be playing in the fantasy football playoffs. So weeks 15, 16, 17, it's an absolute brutal nightmare. If you want to know the matchups, he has the Los Angeles Rams, who have been forcing running backs to score less than their weekly average to that point in the season. He's got New England, Pittsburgh, who's been surprisingly decent against the run, and San Francisco in the championship game. So again, no green light matchups, all difficulties there. He is a workhorse for this team. I hope the Raiders can get things together and cinch up their offensive attack, but I do have question marks about his ceiling, and especially if the Raiders get into negative game script situations, particularly in that championship matchup week 17, things could be a little bit dicey, and I do have some concerns about him. That's why he lands down here at number 10. All right, diving into my tier 4 players. These are my running backs 11 to 14 for the rest of this season. This is a really interesting tier for me. There's a lot of different directions you could go with this, and again, if you guys want to argue or disagree with the order that I have players in these tiers, I don't mind that. I mean, obviously, there is a case to be made for all of these players. This is just the way I see things as I'm sitting here recording this episode for you guys today. And I had a great deal of thought go into this tier, especially because I was really hesitant to put Ramondre Stevenson over the likes of the other players on the list for today. But at the end of the day, this is a player in his offense that is the clear best offensive playmaker this team has. They are more dependent on Ramondre Stevenson in New England than they are on anyone else to move the chains for this offense. He has clearly asserted himself as the lead running back for this football team. Damian Harris, it seems like he's a thing of the past here. He is getting some snaps and some touches every week, but Stevenson's the more efficient player, the more productive player, and the clear choice on passing down situations. So we've seen that result in consistent success for him this year, and it's been a great story to watch for Ramondre Stevenson. Now, he does have a above average difficulty for his strength of schedule this postseason, meaning that's a negative thing in terms of the way I view that. But if you're giving him the amount of touches he's been consistently getting here as of late since that Damian Harris initial hamstring injury, which really allowed and opened the door for a Stevenson takeover and breakout, then I'm going to be riding comfortably as we progress throughout the rest of this season. For Dalvin Cook, I was really tempted to put him over Stevenson, but there's just been something about Cook's fantasy lineup viability this year that just has me a little bit skeptical. Now, the points are showing up at the end of the day for the last 4 to 5 week stretch. He's been very good, but he's had a hot hand for touchdown scoring, and even last week, if you look at the matchup against the Commanders, there's just an element of, if you look at his game and his production, and he doesn't score that late receiving touchdown, you're really just kind of left wondering why he wasn't able to produce in that matchup. I feel like at times Minnesota is overly dependent on the pass game, and it hurts Dalvin Cook's fantasy stock. Now, am I panicking on him? Not necessarily. Do I think it's a super negative thing? Because he is still getting the nod in the red zone scenarios and getting touchdown productivity. That's great. But it is something that I do worry about, and in the spot where the lights are shining the brightest, you need points at their most pivotal time for your team's season. I don't know if he's the guy I feel most comfortable with depending on to get that production for me. So he plays in a high-level production offense. He's an extremely talented player. He's a lead back, again, for a competent football team. He checks a lot of boxes. There's just a little bit of that worry that he has for me. He has an average strength of schedule going forward, and I just see a streaky nature to his production potentially here as things get tough. He's got Buffalo this week, which is a difficult matchup. Jonathan Taylor, lo and behold, who would have thought? I mean, in a week where, and we'll see what happens. This video is going to be posted Friday. He'll play Sunday, and we'll see how things turn out here. But in a week where everyone was bailing on Jonathan Taylor, freaking out, saying to sell him low, I said to buy for JT because his owners were in an absolute disarray of panicking distraughtment. I don't even think that's a word. Distraught is a word, but I think I poorly misused it. Everyone was freaking out. That's the bottom line here. And I said, take a shot at him. There is a chance that you could get yourself the opportunity to have a really solid running back, potentially not even giving up a running back in exchange for him. And lo and behold, it's Friday afternoon. I'm recording this episode, or excuse me, it's, oh my gosh, I keep screwing up the days I'm posting this stuff. I'm like a day behind every single episode. You're going to see this on Saturday morning. I'm recording it on Friday afternoon. And Friday afternoon, as a matter of fact, he's off the injury report. His ankle has not been listed, and he is expected to play while his counterpart and teammate Deion Jackson has been ruled out of this week's matchup. So, craziness. absolute wild turn of events in favor of me, potentially. Now, he could go out there and stink it up. They've got the Raiders. They've got Jeff Saturday. It's a complete debacle there. But it does look like the arrow is pointed back upwards, and we could see a resurgence for Jonathan Taylor, which would be a very big deal here for him. So, could be fool's gold, or it could be great. My potential optimism for JT is Jeff Saturday does not need to be this creative play designer. My expectation is that he's just going to walk out there and use the playbook that Frank Reich's offense used. He's just going to, kind of deploy the plays in a different manner and try and be a bit more sound with how things go here. So turn around and hand the ball off 25, 30 times. Doesn't all have to be to JT. Get that offensive run game moving. Push people out of the way. If you're not skillful enough up front to pass block on a consistent basis and your quarterback play stinks right now, hand the ball off to your franchise running back. It makes too much sense to not occur here. And then Damian Pierce. I literally almost messed up Damian Harris earlier, and then we turned right around and messed up Damian Pierce. Damian Pierce is a player that I have extreme confidence in his floor at this current point in time. Now, he is active for this week's game. He came in questionable with a chest and shoulder injury. That doesn't concern me too much. He's got an average strength of schedule going forward here. Again, he does have the Giants in Week 10. He's been getting work. He's been the focal point of this offense, the core of this team's ball movement up front. Overall, they use him at a high level. The comparisons to J-Rob in 2020 have been spot on. He's not the most explosive guy in the world, but boy, can he make plays, and he a reliable threat in lineups on a week-in, week-out basis. So really like what you're getting here for Damian Pierce. This is a high-level running back to in essentially all formats he can produce, even in PPR, despite the fact that he's not giving you that reception value that a lot of us look for. All right, into Tier 5 now. This seems kind of odd to have these guys in Tier 5, but that's just pay less attention to the number and more attention to who's actually on the tiers and the distributions of that tier, if you will. So for Aaron Jones and Miles Sanders here, Aaron Jones starting things off. My running backs 15 and 16 for this week. The key for Aaron Jones, his ankle injury, just like Jonathan Taylor's, boom, axed from the injury report. He's going to be good to go against Dallas. If these guys are truly healthy and are not actually banged up heading into these games, there is a difference between actually being off the injury report and being 100% healthy. We kind of see this flare up earlier in the season with DeAndre Swift. But again, we'll see what happens here. They're not even holding that questionable tag heading into Sunday. It's Friday, and they've both been wiped off the report. So that being JT and Aaron Jones, keep your eye on it. But this seems to be an incredibly positive thing here. He had a down game last week after being ruled out. Had just, I believe it was a 41% snap count percentage. A.J. Dillon had to come in and finish that contest. They need Aaron Jones more now than ever than they did in Green Bay, even a couple of weeks back. They've lost more playmakers. There's been more issues on the offensive side of the ball. Lean on your best pieces and playmakers. That's what this team should be doing, and Aaron Jones is clearly and evidently the best player to get the rock to. Now, that doesn't mean they're going to do it. That doesn't mean that this is going to play out and happen this way. If it does, he should be able to exceed this running back 16 ranking this running back 15 ranking, because the more touches he's getting, the more opportunities he's having for those big runs, catches, and explosive plays and whatnot. So I'm excited and confident about him going forward, but that ankle is kind of still lingering in the back of my mind, as it is for Jonathan Taylor here, despite the injury designations being wiped. I'm not just pushing him right back up my rankings boards because of that. And as a matter of fact, to this point in the season, they have not deserved that status of being higher on the tiers for today. Just things worth noting in today's episode. And then Miles Sanders. So for Aaron Jones as well, it is a above average difficulty for that strength of schedule. Not loving to see that. For Miles Sanders here, it's an average strength of schedule going forward. The problem we have with Miles Sanders is unpredictability. We know he's really good. We know he's really efficient. We know he's explosive. We know that he's the lead running back on this team. It's no longer a true committee as it has been in years past. The problem is Jalen Hurts. As much as he adds to the potential for defenses paying too much attention to his ability to pull out that football in the option game and take it up the sideline, that's also an issue in the red zone. So while that might open up doors to rip a 20-yard run on inside zone read, that also might take away a 6-point play inside the 5-yard line where Hurts keeps it, calls his own number, and scores. So for a guy who's not a pure workhorse, he is the clear lead back. Again, I don't think it's a committee anymore. He's still not a guy who's getting 20 rushing attempts every week. So there is that kind of gray area between how much can you really project his fantasy success on a week-to-week basis, because at times it is touchdown dependent. So I love Miles. I'm very confident in him when I put him in my lineups every week, but it is a situation to monitor, to keep your eye on here, because at the end of the day, he can kind of snake bite you a little bit and deliver a stinker when you're least expecting it. Next up, my running backs 17 to 20. Now, this is the last tier of players, and this is again 17 to 20, that I feel comfortable starting given full health for these pieces on a week-to-week basis. For DeAndre Swift, more good news. He is not on the injury report and does not have any designation for an injury tag heading into their matchup at Chicago this week. However, recently it's been a frustrating period. Since week 3, it's been 7 weeks of hell here for DeAndre Swift owners who, if you didn't have Jamal Williams, are basically out in the desert trying to salvage fantasy production. It's few and far between. It's hard to find this position group. He's coming off of a season low 16% snap count percentage. That's kind of gross. We don't like to see that, but again, health is the key here for DeAndre Swift. If he's good to go, if he's healthy, he's not going to be a workhorse, but he's going to be the clear lead back in this offense, getting that pass-catching involvement. He's so explosive, elusive, and efficient. It doesn't take much for him to create a touchdown out of thin air. He can shake someone in the open field and spurt loose down the sideline. Boom, touchdown, hands up in the air. He can get a catch inside the 20-yard line, shake somebody, and good old shake and bake into the end zone for another 6 points. He is so talented to make plays. He's capable of doing it. Detroit's offense, the first 4 weeks, first month of the season, we saw what it's capable of. It's been banged up ever since, and they've been depreciating since then as well. I hope they can get it back on track here down the stretch and turn things around. Again, a healthy DeAndre Swift is a healthy fantasy lineup. Leonard Fournette here at the running back 17 position. Not an efficient player this year. This Tampa offense is sputtering. They can't run the football. The line play stinks. It's been a disaster. But what we're clinging on to is touchdown involvement and receiving work. The one other added red flag we have is Rachaad White's potential expansion of his role in this offense. That could play a pivotal part here. And Lenny has an above-average difficulty for his strength of schedule going forward. So that's something I'm keeping my eye on and being a little bit pessimistic about here. But the player, hopefully, is still there that can give you top 15 weekly production, that can be a super viable PPR play. It's just kind of spotty. You don't know when Tampa's going to be clicking offensively, if ever, down the stretch. We hope they're one of the highest. They have to be the highest passing volume offense in the league. I haven't checked that analytic, but for how often Brady throws every single week, he's got to be up there. That's because they can't run the football effectively. And part of that's an offensive line problem. Part of it's a play calling problem. And part of it's a Leonard Fournette problem. And that part stinks, but it's the reality of the situation. D'Onta Foreman, man, I was a fan after watching the first couple of games. He filled in for CMC as the team's new lead back. Obviously, Chuba was, but it's the Foreman show from here on out going forward. It has to be. He's been so productive in 2 out of those 3 games. And man, did watching the post-game presser for him, where he gave all the credit for his performance to the offensive line. 2 games against Atlanta, completely ate them up. This Atlanta team was 8th against the run this season, and he just decimated them. They have an identity in Carolina. They know what they are. They know what they aren't. And that's what you need for fantasy football. Because if you can cater your team needs to what the team is doing on Sundays, you'll be just fine. This isn't a good situation for DJ Moore. This is a team that wants to run the ball, play physical smash mouth football, and wear you down throughout a game. DJ's not going to be getting a high level of opportunities every week, although he's very talented and is capable of doing so. So at the end of the day, Foreman has completely captured my fantasy football interest here. This has been a guy that's been super fascinating to watch throughout this point in the season. He's had 3 100-yard games out of 4 that he has played, again, post-CMC trade. So super jacked about him going forward. He is an RB2 the rest of the way this season. And then CPAT still working his way back into the fray after the knee issue that held him up for 4 weeks on the IR. He didn't reclaim as much of the snap count percentage as I expected him to. Tyler Algier was still a factor, but CPAT was still clearly the lead back. Now, the game script went poorly. They didn't run the football with the same enthusiasm I thought they would. It was a bad game on Thursday Night Football this week for Cordero. I expected him to do filthy things to the Panthers defense, but it didn't come to fruition. Regardless, he's got an average strength of schedule going forward, and I'd like to see that snap count percentage go up, and potentially some more receiving involvement because he has basically been exiled from that phase of things here. Had 1 catch for 2 yards this past week, but at the end of the day, I do still have confidence in him as a lower end RB2 with the high ceiling in a weekly basis. All right, into tier, what is this now? Tier 7. So breaking down my running backs 21 to 23 the rest of the way. The first two here, Tony Pollard and Jamal Williams, have average strength of schedules in the fantasy playoffs. James Conner, on the other hand, has a really nice strength of schedule going forward and is coming off of a game where we'll get to James Conner in a second here. For Tony Pollard, the reason he makes this tier and is so highly ranked, despite the fact that he is not a true starter in this league, as well as Jamal Williams, at this point in time at least, is the fact that Ezekiel Elliott is banged up. His knee is not in great shape. He is questionable, and Jerry Jones says he expects him to play here. But at the end of the day, what am I supposed to do? Trust an inefficient running back in Ezekiel Elliott, who is incredibly touchdown dependent in any given weekly matchup, or go the direction of the guy who doesn't get used in a workhorse fashion, but it is absurdly efficient and continues to rip explosive plays off down the sideline, scoring touchdowns and making things happen, moving the sticks for this Dallas offense? I'm going to take the latter. I'm going to pass on Ezekiel Elliott here. I'm going to fade him the rest of the season and trust that if his health is compromised, Tony Pollard is going to be a humongous ceiling play, despite the fact that he seems to get 15 touches or less every single week that he's out there. Even if he has exorbitant target opportunities, it literally seems to cap out at 15 touches. So for Pollard, I've got a lot of confidence in him here. Again, he's explosive, dynamic. The line play is better than expected, or expected that it would be this year after the Tyron Smith injury. So go Tony Pollard, go. We're riding with you the rest of the way this season. Jamal, again, I honestly don't really have to say much more than what I said in the DeAndre Swift take here. Weeks 4 through 10 here, or this is leading into week 10. He's been the guy. I mean, he's had to be the guy. DeAndre Swift hasn't been healthy. He hasn't been available. And what does that mean? Goal line opportunities for Jamal Williams. Pass catching opportunities in streaky situations here. He's good enough to make things happen. He had 24 rushes, 81 yards in week 9. When they need to call his number, he always picks up the phone, answers, and gets the job done for fantasy lineups. He's a goal line vulture as well, so his RB3 level utility, even if Swift's on the field. Like I said, DeAndre Swift is not a workhorse. Jamal will always have some level of opportunity and usage, volume in this offense, if you will, so can't completely write him off, even if DeAndre Swift is truly healthy for this week's games. And then James Conner, as I said, really good playoff schedule here, had 71% of the snaps in his first game back last week. He has this week's matchup. I forget who the Cardinals play here this week. I apologize about that. They probably could be on bye as well, and I just look stupid right now. But let me check on that real quick. Yeah, no, never mind. They have the Rams. So this is a tough matchup here in week 11, but like I said, moving forward, the rest of season schedule is very strong here. I like their playoff schedule, and this is a guy that if recouping that much of the snap count percentage in his first game back as a Cardinal, of course, and having battled rib and ankle injuries throughout the entirety of this year, I feel very comfortable about what that means for his usage rate and his overall involvement in this offense going forward. So I will give him the benefit of the doubt here. I will put him in the lower end tier ranking of the top 24. So he's my RB23 going forward this season. I think that just his caliber of play in the 2021 year mixed with optimism for what he can do here in 2022 gives him that status. Obviously, there's been a drop-off since last year, but at the end of the day, he could still go out there, produce lineup-worthy numbers, and be a respectable play here down the stretch of this season. All right, so we've got ourselves the one-man tier here. Our 8th tier is just Najee Harris for today. The reasoning for this is that it is just really hard to lump him in with the next group. However, I don't feel he deserves to be placed with the tier 7 running backs as well. He just has not found running lanes. His offense is complete garbage. His offensive line has been trash. And as the widely circulating meme of him literally cutting back and forth and juking himself into a 0-yard gain on like 3rd and 1 or 4th and 1, maybe it was 4th and 2, he's just not playing good football this year. The red flags were there the entire time. You didn't have the rotting corpse, Big Ben Roethlisberger, shovel passing you 5 targets a game. You didn't have a good offensive line to begin with when you had the Liz Frank sprain. That's another reason for concern here. It has been tough sledding this year. and it's not expected to get any better. At least I'm not expecting it to for Najee Harris. He's got an average middle-of-the-pack schedule moving forward this year, but at the end of the day, I just haven't trusted what I've seen so far this year. It has been the utmost level of touchdown dependency, but he's also a lead back for an offense that could be changing. We're hearing some Jalen Warren rumors. I'm not really buying into them. I give it a 10-15% shot that he really expands his role significantly whatsoever, but for Najee Harris, it has been a brutal stretch of games this season, and hopefully a season to forget as we move into 2023. All right, so for our last tier today, we've got our ninth tier, kicking it off with Raheem Mostert and Jeff Wilson Jr. So these are our running backs, 25 through 30 here for ending off today's episode. So Wilson Jr. and Mostert are going to be our running backs 25 and 26 on the same team, of course. It's tough to predict right now. There's some telling signs that look to be extremely beneficial and positive for Jeff Wilson Jr., his first game with the team after not even a full week after the trade deadline. He outsnapped Mostert at a touchdown, outtouched him by 3. It was 12-9. All that stuff is great, but who knows how they're going to distribute this backfield going forward. It might just be kind of the hot-handed 1-2 punch. So with that being said, it makes both of these players a little bit less attractive to start each week, but they are, capable and have experience in this West Coast, zone style offense. So, take that for what it's worth. I do think that there is some lower end RB2 utility here in good matchups. Ceiling, of course, is a factor as well, but that floor is taking a bit of a ding. David Montgomery here. I like his rest of season schedule. It is actually one of the best in fantasy here. The one issue is unpredictability as it relates to Khalil Herbert. So what you've got in Khalil Herbert is a guy who can come in the game, check in for one play, and run like counter or some play that gets explosive, blocking out in space or blocking out in space that creates explosive running, and he'll rip a huge play off, and then they'll start giving him carries the rest of the game and kind of defer to him a little bit. So Montgomery isn't the same pure workhorse that we're accustomed to seeing in years past. He is still a very talented player. He is a capable back, a guy who can do all 3 downs, but usage has been something that's peeled back even just enough to kind of hinder his fantasy upside, if you will, in addition to the fact that Justin Fields is also eating up some of that run game. So, again, put some context behind David Montgomery here. He is a starting running back for a team, has a great schedule, but at the end of the day, it is kind of shaky here to still try and project him moving forward. Devin Singletary, the big thing for him here is currently going to be Josh Allen's health. The more injured Josh Allen is, or the less healthy he is rather, the less I expect to see high volume passing situations, the more they might be inclined to hand the football off. Now, I don't think Devin Singletary's ceiling is particularly high. I think his floor is also particularly low. However, it's something we're thinking about here in Week 10 after seeing him not practice for 3 consecutive days. And then last up here, the Jags running backs, literally looking at the jersey, just not having an updated headshot. Threw me off there, but there is not one available the day I'm recording this video yet. Took me a few days to get that, actually a couple of weeks to get the CMC one updated post-trade deadline. But it's Michael Carter and James Robinson neck and neck. I think J-Rob may just eke his way ahead of Michael Carter down the stretch of this season. Both of these players have fantastic rest of season schedules. But for both of them, it is kind of dicey right now to predict the usage. Last week, I predicted in Week 9 against Buffalo, it'd be Michael Carter, who ultimately was the more productive player, but I guessed it for the wrong reasons. I said he'd be catching passes, they'd be trailing late, and they'd be using him as a bit more of a scat back type player in that game. Not the case. They win the game outright. Both score a touchdown. Both are solid lineup producers in that matchup. However, we still saw Michael Carter barely edging him out at 52% of the snap count percentage to 40% for J-Rob. So off the bye week here, coming into Week 11 against New England, we might see them lean a bit more back towards J-Rob here, and we'll see how it plays out down the stretch of the season. But again, good matchups for both these players. Cheap guys you want to buy right now for just having them on your rosters as options for lineup plays the rest of the way this season. And there you guys have it. That was our top 30 rest of season running back rankings for 2022 fantasy football. As always, if you enjoyed, smash the like button, click that subscribe button as well, and turn that bell on so you're never late for a new piece of content. As always, let me know any questions you've got about your teams down in the comment section below. I'm happy to get back to you guys, respond to anything you're wondering about here, and help you out down the stretch of this fantasy football season. So, as always, I appreciate the heck out of you guys. Check out our other, again, wide receiver episode out on the channel today in our Week 10 fantasy football playlist, and I will see you there. Peace out.